Good afternoon, fellow citizens. Welcome to episode 37 of the Citizens Chat Show. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much for always following these conversations. Today, of course, we want to discuss the regional politics in East Africa, but also the never-ending conflict in DRC. Of course, we've had and seen these conflicts spanning across Africa. We've seen in Mali. We have cases, of course, in Ethiopia now. We have the DRC situation, but also we have the Sudan question. So to discuss this conversation and, of course, this topic and much more around the East African community and the entire Africa, I am joined by very competent panelists, and of course, no one is new on the panel today. All of you have been here severally, and I would want to start with retired Major Awich Pollar. Of course, is the Director External Services with the NRM, which you're welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, viewers.
Yeah, thank you. And also followed by Sarah Bireete, the Executive Director with the Center for Constitutional Governance, a regular panelist and a lawyer.
Thank you, Demian, and good afternoon, viewers.
Thank you. And finally is Joseph Ochieno, the UPC Ideologue, and of course, the contestant of the UPC leadership. Welcome, Joseph.
Thank you, Demian, and thank you, fellow citizens.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just straight into the conversation. Today, you're not surviving me, Awich, and I need to start with you. I will need to understand what is the major source of conflict and regional instability in Africa today.
Wow, that's a broad question. But always my tools of analysis is that conflicts revolve around materiality, not spirituality. I wouldn't like to believe that even when you say the conflict is led by Lord's resistance, it's about the spirit. So all conflicts are material in nature, and that tools of analysis was well expounded by Karl Marx to the extent that you don't see two communities fighting just because one is another tribe, one is another. Take, for example, in Liatonde. Liatonde is one area where you find Ankole meeting Buganda. So you have two communities. Don't make any mistake of thinking that one community of Ankole would decide to fight Baganda just because they have tribes. No. It must be either grazing land for the cows, land for cultivation, water for drinking for the cows, and all that. So nobody fights for nothing. So as usual, the conflicts in Africa, and especially in Great Lakes, rotates around material and who wants to control what. But that is the inside. But the outside face will be presented in various aspects. It looks like tribes, it looks like religion and all that. But basically, if we have to do a good diagnosis and get the problem from the roots, it's material conflicts, which make many parties tend to get the flagship manifested in other avenues. So that is generally a response. To me, a response to your issue is control of resources. And if you check deep, is either one community thinking that they have been denied by another, and that is why conflicts do arise. Even if you say it is manifested, say, for political control. Political control for what? People don't control politics to go to church. People control politics so that you're in charge of decision making. You are in charge of resource allocation. So I'm back to the point that materiality determines conflicts, and in all these particular cases, it is materiality which is determining it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Major Awich, and of course, with the experience, we would want to believe. So I don't know whether Sarah, you could buy into his line of thought.
Of course, when he compares needs with the spirits, and in a political environment where you have people claiming to be Bachwezi who disappeared, it becomes a bit controversial. But away from his line, which I will leave at that, we have a big democracy deficit in Africa. At times I ask myself as a Christian, when God zooms into Africa, what does he see vis-a-vis what he created? This is the most endowed continent. All resources of the world are found in Africa. From minerals to water bodies to strong and large energetic population. You know, name it. Africa has everything in terms of what a continent would need to develop. But the disruptions by leadership, right from the tribal and or traditional chiefs, other than Mansa Musa, who is still the richest man ever alive. And that shows you the richness of Africa. I think Mansa Musa is the demonstration of richness of Africa as a continent. But we had tribal chiefs. I don't know whether it was excitement, the way they engaged in slave trade, exchange of human beings for mirrors. You are looking at yourself for the first time, and then you think people can take whoever they want. And then Jews, yes, I'm wearing a few pieces. But the way leadership, right from that time of slave trade, disregard for humanity or human values, disrespect, killings, merciless killings, up to today. People like blaming colonialists, and I think really that is laziness. Yes, you can say, why did you come, and if you abandon your wife and say, now 10 years you are returning, even when the law says after 2 years of desertion there is no marriage, then you wake up 10 years and say, you know, this is my wife. Then how about the law? Where have you been? How did the colonialists come here in the first place? And who welcomed them and who gave them seats to occupy the places that they occupied? Was it forceful? Did we welcome them? Were we accomplices? Was there a virtue? Nature abhors a virtue. Then the 6 decades now of independence or self-rule. I like calling it self-misgovernance. Really, in every country, Ghana has had its ups and downs, but it is still the best model that we have as a continent. Right now in the parliament of Ghana, it is 50-50. Opposition, ruling party with a speaker coming from opposition. And they are carrying on very well. There is a balance. Rights in Ghana, human rights. The management of mineral resources, the minimization of corruption. Tanzania used to be a safe haven for the Great Lakes region until greed took over and the sense of entitlement by Chama cha Mapinduzi. And now they are in excessive violence, excessive violation of rights, corruption that Magufuli tried to fight, but also indirectly perpetrating it, including building airports and roads in his hometown that he cannot use now. And really, vanity. So, but when it comes to the hotspots now for conflict in Africa, we have had coups. We had thought that with the enactment of the African Union Act, Constitutive Act of African Union, that outlawed coups, including expulsion of countries from AU membership, one would have thought that that move would have checked, would have ended gun rule in Africa. But from 2000 to date, I think this year has been a year of re-emergence of coups. Mali, Ethiopia, people are just holding, like holding the intestines of a cow after slaughter. Sudan. Now they are in a second cycle of military takeover. The citizens are saying we don't want the military. South Sudan, a failed peace process up to today. And then coming closer home, we have the DRC, which is commonly known as the sick man of Africa. DRC has vast resources. First, it's a big continent. I think it's one of the biggest in Africa, with vast natural resources, estimated at $24 trillion, the mineral resources. Inga Dam has capacity to supply power to Africa and Europe, if fully developed. It has the forests with the unique timber that is wanted world over. Every resource that you talk of, including cobalt, is found in DRC. If God was moving in his natural way, it would be right to think that he settled in DRC before man's disruptions. But what do we have? The people are always on the move. It contributes 4.5 million internally displaced in DRC persons, contributes minimum of 800,000 refugees to its neighbors. And every year, you must see poor women, poor children carrying mattresses, children crying, people trying to cross with one goat, one sheep. Every year, you must see an exodus, a move back and forth, trying to enter Uganda. Either they are fleeing, fighting with the biggest volume, let me call it volume, of militias, because there is an estimate of 134 militias now in Eastern DRC, in areas of Kivu, in areas of Kasai.
134,000?
Oh no, 134 militias, not 1,000.
134 groups.
Yes,
Oh.
Armed groups.
Mm.
And among that, those groups is the famous March 23 movement, or which we commonly know as M23. Of course, it was formed on that day and it named itself from that. But what is M23? I think we shall go into that debate. That is an open war. It's commonly written about as a war without a name because it's endless. It's endless. It is the sick man of Africa. It is the sick man of the whole world. But we also have silent wars. If today anybody heard that there is fighting on Uganda-Rwanda border, would you be shocked? Why is that border closed? Why are people's lives disrupted? So I think this is the crisis. It's a crisis of leadership. It is a failure of the African people, and we should stop finding lazy excuses to foreigners.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that extensive opener. And then I would want to bring in Ochieno. Pollar talks of course, the material gains, the main cause of these conflicts. Then, of course, Sarah brings in the uncautions of not using the foreigners and, of course, the colonialists as an excuse for this, but also blames the leadership. Do you have any other view that you think would really bring out the reason why we still have these endless instabilities in Africa?
Why it's still hard, or whether really why we ever had them? I think the material element is, you would say, the motivating grounds for which these conflicts are, and you can take it back to the time of pre-slavery, and that is when even the African was commodified. And so, like Sarah says, we are the richest continent. So the rest of the world, unfortunately, has come to feed and continue to feed on our peoples and on our resources. But number two, it is quite clearly a crisis of leadership, and leadership at the moment is at the center. Most of these conflicts would have been as a result of failure of leadership. But I think in between that, the center where Sarah would possibly say that after 60 years, we should let go, unfortunately, the imperialists and the slave masters. I would suggest that, unfortunately, the reality is not the case. There is an audio going around on the question of my biggest disappointment on the continent, which is Ethiopia. We had, and I had huge amount of hope on Ethiopia in the last few years, that Ethiopia was actually going to be the helper nation state, exemplary for the African continent, and perhaps with the Addis being the provisional capital for the continent, that the Abiy government and whoever else followed him would be the example of how next Africa is going to be governed. But out of that, it clearly shows that, ironically, alleged that the United Nations staff are involved in playing partisan. But the underlying element of that is that the Western powers that control the UN agencies are necessarily direct interested groups in the conflict. And so therefore the Ethiopian conflict is not as simplistic, a Tigrarian versus Oromo or the other, or perhaps one identity versus the central government. So that unfortunately is the problem. That unfortunately is the real. What does it mean? It means that since the days of slavery, the guys who came and treated us like property, the guys who then came several decades later.
Where were we?
No, I'll actually explain that. Who came in and divided us like sweets in Berlin conference, still strong and real. It's interesting you say, where were we? Because I remember at the peak of my exile to try and reclaim Uganda, Museveni is alleged to have made a comment that we Africans were stupid, that's why we're taking as slaves, something along those lines. I'll need to try and get the quote, but it was a real quote, if I can recall, because I wrote about it. And many people were up in arms that this guy was possibly abusing ourselves. The issue then is, if then we were stupid, that's why we're taking as slaves. Mr. Museveni today is possibly one of the best apologists for the guys who took us for slaves, and to the extent that actually some of the wars in Africa find their roots in Uganda. Look at Congo.
Could I ask you one question on
Yeah,
that?
sure.
Yes, Demiano, with your permission, Africa is not the only continent that was colonized.
I was coming to that.
America was
No,
colonized.
fair.
How come they've picked their pieces and moved?
Sarah, that's very interesting, because I was actually going to come to, it's not a contradiction to what I'm saying.
Okay.
I was actually basically going to say that those are the factors, if you identify them. And I was just going to come back to Sarah and say, look, after all those ones, why is it, what is it, is there some funny curse on the African continent that all other continents, all other peoples seem to put their houses in order, but for us Africans we fail? And why I actually bring Museveni was very deliberate. That even Museveni, who actually thought we were stupid, who had a fairly strong view about slavery, and that it was because of an absence of leadership or direction, rules after 34 years. But instead of being a force for change and a force for good, he becomes actually part of the problem, including a direct implied cause of conflicts, particularly within our region. Museveni was directly responsible, in a way, for the conflict in Rwanda, the invasion and occupation of Rwanda, invasion and occupation of Burundi, invasion and occupation twice of Congo, invasion and occupation of Sudan. To an extent, yes, a direct role in Somalia, which is sold as the AU thing, but which is basically somebody else's war. But that's neither here nor there. The point really is conflicts in Africa. Where are we? We talked about M23. Who founded it? Who backed it? We know at some stage there's a Rwanda element. What's the Ugandan element into it? So really, I want to give a quick one going forward, that while it is a question of leadership, while it's a question of a conflict for resources, which the others came to actually grab, which they continue to want to control today, why is it that we're not putting our house in order? I think part of the reason why we're not putting our house in order may be part of the later part of the conversation. What is it? Are we that divided by identity question that Awich was trying to talk about? Is it really the issue? I really don't think so. Because looking back to our early founding parents, I'm talking about the leadership, our founding parents were substantially visionary, to the extent that actually the crudest ideals have returned to Ghana. It's not surprising that Ghana actually providing the relative leadership where people are prepared to look beyond their political parties and affiliations, beyond the religious identities, and indeed beyond their own personal interest, and look at an element for Ghana first. But we don't really want a Ghana first or Uganda first alone. We want to have these African commitments where Nkrumah was prepared to send forces to Congo to rescue the Lumumbis, and so was Obote prepared to do that to try and rescue the situation in Congo and indeed the situation in Southern Africa. What are we saying? I am actually saying that, well, perhaps the more we interrogated many of these things, the more they hope that there will be an emergence of new leadership on the continent beyond the Museveni generation that are able to begin to ask the very tough question that Sarah is asking. What is it after 60 years that we can't put our house in order ourselves and claim the ownership of these other things, meaning the youth of Africa? With COP26, meaning the climate and the environment is going sick, perhaps our younger generation and the civic space will possibly help say that, well, if we don't act rather quickly, then we shall have no continent going forward, because by the time we wake up, we shall wake up with all our gold and diamonds and, and oils being occupied and controlled elsewhere, and we have river streams that can hardly give us basic, decent water for our children.
Oh, thank you very much, Ochieno, for that one. And of course, I think we're trying to put the context and trying to make, of course, our viewers understand where we're coming from and why we still have these issues. But Major Awich, I need to also bring this to you, that maybe pose a question. We've had decades of regional blocks created across the continent, but these blocks are supposed to help in a way trying to curb these conflicts. But we are seeing these conflicts over and over happening. Sarah mentioned the act of the AU, and try to see how to end the coups, but we see this happening. Why is this so?
Well,
is it still answers a question on leadership?
The regional blocks that I have known of, Africa mainly, you have the SADC, you have the East African Community, you have the ECOWAS, you have AU itself. My opinion is that the current state system, with its principle of sovereignty, has not gone so much. It can't go so much to making use of the effectiveness of a regional bloc, because states assume sovereignty, and the principle of sovereignty has always been challenged. To how far are you sovereign? For example, if it is your family, are you saying this is my family, I'm sovereign to kill my daughters, to kill my sons, to kill my wife? Sovereign has been challenged there as far as areas of human rights is concerned. That even if you're sovereign, in a civilized group of nations, they foreigners will have a say. Therefore, in that principle of sovereignty, many regional blocs have always been formed. But the state holders, the head of states, to me, I do not think they're genuine enough to surrender themselves or to surrender the countries to the security of regions or forces. When it happens, everybody will claim, no, it is my country. I do not see a situation where you'll take an East African country to Rwanda, to Burundi, or to Uganda. No. So the conflicts have continued. Then we therefore, because of that entrenched sovereignty where heads of states carve their territory, we end up at a lip service provision in as far as tackling conflicts in the areas is concerned. I assume it is internal. ECOWAS tried. I think they have almost tried to break down the sovereignty principle, such that I think in one or two cases they have intervened. But above all is that states talk at regional or even continental levels, even at United Nations, but no single state with their leadership has really left the principle of sovereignty, meaning that it's my country, please, some, His Excellency, they don't do much in it. Some tend to call in or wish to come in to call when things are bad. I don't know the situation, what is going to happen in Ethiopia. We are going to have IGAD meeting in Munyonyo soon. So I don't know if in this case, the prime minister will say, come in my country, or the prime minister will still insist, I am sovereign. Because if he does that, then we are going to see that the relativity, the sovereignty is relative and circumstantial. When your hands are twisted, you open up, come and solve this conflict. But when you think you are on the upper hand, please stay away out of it. So that to the extent that I even wonder the dreams that we have about one East Africa, leave alone the dream of one Africa, this dream of sovereignty is deep down us. Everybody else thinks is, I want mine. So, the regional blocks are there. But to what extent do the regional blocks actually come as one and break and go into effective conflict management? We have had for a long time the Great Lakes region instrument. That Great Lakes regions was meant to bring states who are members of the Great Lakes to effectively solve conflict, and in this case, conflict problems. But again, as I say, it is much around and about lip service, guided by that principle of sovereignty. It's my country. So I'm yet to see who will be that first sovereign country, who will open up, that ladies and gentlemen, come and solve this conflict. It's too much. Maybe when
one would then wonder, why do we have to make these formations if they really don't meet up to
and spend money
on them?
I think the spirit is there,
No.
but somehow we haven't grown over this sovereignty principle. How about if we were to take best practices? To what extent has Europe done it? Can we say, for example, that there are other parts of the region which have really implemented it to the dot, so that we ask ourselves and say, why us? Europe has tried, but even the way Europe has done it, they have not done it through a military solution. The effective situations, although it still holds, for example, we have recently seen Poland. Poland was holding out to say, no, that is not the definition of what we say in our country. You find states coming out to say, our understanding. Once you see a state trying to define even a provision under the European Charter or under the European Convention that our understanding, you really see that that state is trying to carve out sovereignty also, trying to tell other European powers that don't. So we are yet to see how sovereignty develops and breaks all through. Because as I say, we don't even have any best practice to cite anyway, not even in Europe. Poland, just of recent, as I said, they are very guarded about being inside their affairs. So, the question now is, what is the use of these regional blocks?
True.
Some countries in Europe, they have benefited more economically and on human rights basis, because they have courts, regional human rights courts, which rule and the decision is effected. You have a regional human rights court which rules. I'm not so sure about the effect of the ruling of an Arusha court, for example. If an Arusha court rules on a matter in Rwanda, if it can be operationalized. Because I'm saying, if we can't do it at the state, pure state per se, military, policing, how about at the judicial level? So it's a long way to go.
Interesting. And maybe it's an area we need to really discuss much more. And sorry, I would want to understand, are these real leaders forced into these blocks? Or why is it that we can't really do away with them? We constantly have them facilitated, constantly, yet they're not meeting up to the needs of the people.
Regional blocks were formed with good intentions, and well-intending leaders formed them. But the current greedy lot of leaders use them for propaganda purposes. They speak with one language when they are together with their peers, and do the reverse when they get back home. I did mention that largely our problem for conflicts, for race development. It is a leadership question, and we cannot run away from it. If we want, we can blame the people on the basis that they get the leaders they deserve. But we cannot run away from the leadership crisis in Africa, from the leadership and governance deficit in Africa, and now the humanitarian crisis in Africa. The strong regional groups, and I want to use the example of ECOWAS with the military wing of ECOMOG. Very effective. During the days of Obasanjo, they would bomb the hell out of you. They call a regional summit, they agree, they sign, you dare do the opposite. ECOMOG would come for you.
Yeah, can we cite any examples of where
they ended conflicts in West Africa?
By and large, and to an extent resolved the Gambian question.
Yes, they ended conflicts in West Africa.
I think in Liberia they were also there,
yes.
Where Uganda also went though, but ECOMOG was there.
Very present. And they would give you even the number of days to step down and organize elections, or they kick the hell out of you, out of power. I think that's what these regional blocs should be about, given our leadership crisis levels. In the East Africa, we tried to borrow it from ECOWAS with intentions of setting up the East African Standby Brigade. It has remained largely on paper, because the purpose of the East African Standby Brigade was that the region could deploy anywhere in the member states, with or without their consent, so long as you are a member and a contributing member of the standby force. Uganda had the first leadership of this standby force, but I've never heard of it again. You know, when the leaders realized that they don't mean what they say, then they found ways of killing this East African Standby Brigade. We have since destabilized the community by admitting less qualifying and very disorganizing members intentionally, to the extent that we are fast rushing the process. If it wasn't for the conflict between Uganda and Rwanda that has broken down the summit, we would have admitted Somalia, we would have admitted DRC by today. And Uganda is the cheerleader of that move. You get a failed state like Somalia. Instead of giving it conditions and processes with a criteria of admission that should be stringent, so that you help the country internal organize itself to be able to qualify as a state that should integrate at the same level with organized states. You carry the chaos, bring it to your bedroom, on top of propagating chaos everywhere else. We admitted South Sudan, and it could not meet the standards of the East African community, minimum. Including things like charging visas from member states, simple things. And because they had a crisis of revenue. So if there was a criteria to say you must meet the 10 conditions, and there is an inspection team. Do you have your internal processes? Are you able to have the one-stop, center on the border points? Are you able to do away with revenue from visas? Because South Sudan finally realized that they have an economic crisis and they needed revenue from visas. Yet wherever their citizens were going, nobody would charge them visas on the basis of the Common Markets Protocol. But you carry this confusion. You don't help. A wish for a country to join an organized economic bloc would help them organize internally. It's like a man intending to marry. In our culture, we had unfortunate practices of some people doing the adult bedwetting. So even if you are engaged in bedwetting and you intend to marry, you have to look for whatever means to make sure that you end your bedwetting behaviors. But you carry a bedwetting person into a marriage and you think you can still sleep on a dry bed? This is what Uganda is doing, drumming Somalia to bring all their confusion. And for them, it is a monetary intention. When our soldiers are in AMISOM, they earn better than they are back home. We earn credit from, we are the ones pacifying Somalia. Then when America is even talking about your deteriorating human rights condition, you want to use the Somalia card
to blackmail them.
To blackmail international community. Then you want to bring DRC because you are a pacifier. Why can't you even first pacify your own country? So these are the double standards of leaders, the hypocrisy, the selfishness, where they carry their bedwetting manners into people's bedrooms.
Interesting, Joe. Joe, do we then need these regional blocks, or are they just a center for a few leaders to benefit at the expense of the nationals?
No, it's very unfortunate, these terrible bedwetting leaders, and shame on them. Thankfully, the youth of this country and the youth of this continent will not be bedwetting going forward. But look, from very authoritatively UPC perspective, we were founding members of the East African Community. We're founding members of the Organization of African Community. And we were, as I am today, totally committed to integration of our region and the integration of our continent, except that it must have what Sarah is talking about, what they actually call in political terms convergence criteria. Europe actually used the convergence criteria to actually take, number one. Number two, actually disclaimer on Europe, Awich. Europe has had all the challenges, but they never really had military coups. And so the manner...
Since when?
No, from around the time of the European community up to sort of where we are at the moment. So in terms of some of the things that we talk about is much more contemporary, which basically is fair enough, the kind of areas that we should be able to put our focus on. And there's no reason why we don't use those ones to match the current realities on the continent and indeed at our region. But Demian, for the record, the East African community for which UPC were founding members, 3 nations, were so successful that it took British Prime Minister, that one who brought Idi Amin together with the Israelis, Ted Heath, to actually say on record that they actually imported some of the ideas for the European Union at the time. But number 2, that they actually worked. I think it was one of the intelligence released after 30 years, worked to try and undermine the East African community, Sarah. The idea was that if the East African community succeeded, it was going to be very difficult. Very difficult. Young Ugandans watch. Very difficult for them to penetrate East Africa. So when I was trying to talk about at the beginning, it's basically that. So what does it mean? It means that these things have possibly ever happened. 1, because there was leadership. 2, there was a conscious ideological commitment for realignment of the African nation, the African personalities, the African states, and indeed including our African economies. Now, what really is lacking in much more contemporary terms is the leadership that Sarah talks about, and to an extent, as I would say, what would ideally need to happen was, and about 10 years ago, I was on a Ugandan television, and I was very critical about supposed East African integration. And I think some people have been saying that these Ochieno guys are basically opposing anything NRA. By then, Sudan was lining up and things like that. It was for the reason that Sarah was trying to put for a show. Integration means that the economic convergence criteria, a political convergence criteria, and legal convergence criteria. Meaning, therefore, that if you say that you want to qualify, that was my original opinion, Sarah, and actually maybe a future UPC government would perhaps consider that, put it back to the table, and it's possibly not a joke, that we go back to the original 3 nation states of East Africa, we thrash out and agree, and then we begin that when we bring in Rwanda, Rwanda must meet a particular criteria, perhaps including language, which by and large they've met, because those are some of the other issues, including whether or not you meet the East African standard for our examination schools and examinations board, something as simplistic as that. Or perhaps you, South Sudan, Do you want to continue playing with the donor dollars, or are you going to meet part of taxation criteria, so for which maybe the tariff barriers that you put are consistent with what Tanzania and or Kenya is committing?
Do we have some of those that are used currently?
Ask her which.
The what?
The criteria for which?
No, they don't.
countries?
They just
don't.
make a
Europe
political
does
push.
it. Europe does it.
No, Europe,
you have
yes,
the-
of course,
No,
Europe.
there's in
does.
Africa, in East
Yeah.
Africa,
East Africa, we don't.
There's
But
a
We
in-
don't.
checklist.
Including Kenya, right now, Kenya is still charging work permits on Ugandans.
Interesting.
After so many years of the Common Markets Protocol coming into force.
I should think we have through the charter and all that, but the implementation.
But then, to the extent that you're actually doubting, and your director of external affairs at the NRA thing actually tells how serious this is, and it's not a political point scoring. It's actually genuinely the case that we really need to take this. But I'm going to take it slightly further. That beyond the convergency criteria for legal, political, and indeed economics, there should also be an element of the governance criteria, meaning how many of the East African nation states, today apparently some groupings, political groupings, are trying to line up to push members of parliament to the East African Legislative Assembly. Somebody is soon going to represent me and my interests, somebody whom I don't know. I don't know their names. I don't know what they represent. I don't know their values. I don't know their track record. I actually don't know their credentials that make them qualify to represent me, to eat Ugandan money in Arusha, representing Uganda's interests at the East African Legislative Assembly. That should actually be one of the most critically contested positions, but it's not. Meaning, it's actually a place for, like RDC thing for NRA. You dump those ones there. So it's a terrible thing. So unless and until we begin to resolve many of these other things, we're not going to go anywhere. But the final point is, so where is the average citizen from Nagongera? Where is the average citizen behind Bireete girls? Of the opinion being asked, I talk Bireete, you know what I'm saying? Where these ordinary citizens of us, people of Nagongera, just as people from Malaba, Uganda, and so Malaba, Kenya, should be actively engaged in many of these other things, so that particularly their political representatives, first of all, currently legislative, must not only engage with them, but must have an idea, is this going to be acceptable to the people of Busia, Uganda, or Busia, Kenya? Number one. But number two, does my political party, Uganda People's Congress, carry on our manifesto, a commitment as far as regional integration is concerned, which we debate together with the NRA guys, if they have any, across the country. And then Ugandans actually buy and said, the party of East Africa in Uganda is Uganda People's Congress. NRA, the party of East Africa, but when it's convenient for them in Congo. Something along those lines. The more you do that, the more then you realize that, yes, when conflicts then emerge, one, nation states are held to account. Two, there's a point of reference. Three, the citizens of the region are able to name and shame. But four, there is what they call power. Power at the regional center and power indeed at the continental level that started saying that, well, you try to seek to either overthrow or to breach, the agreement. Culturally, you are exposed. Culture, leadership, culture. But the cultural thing will be absent, and it will continuously be absent, as long as the citizens are not involved. Final point. I would suggest going forward that no country joins the three founding members of the East African community unless and until a referendum has taken place in that country. For the majority of the citizens of that country, possibly even don't give it a threshold of 51%, maybe take to 60, maybe 2/3 of the citizens, because it's such a crucial thing. Meaning, dealing with the sovereignist question which is talked about, that look, because it's so critical that has got implications on sovereignty, then really the majority of the people of that country must say, yes, we want to go down there, because after all, we are going to cede elements of our sovereign powers to the next regional body.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ochieno. I think that's why I would want to believe that because we don't have a scorecard and we don't have where we would score for which country comes in. I think it is more of one person wanting to bring people closer to where their center of interest is, and maybe that's why we've been failing as a region. But to Awich, I want to understand. Now we have this we're trying to get to understand the DRC question. We are seeing there's an endless conflict in that region. But also we are seeing there are interests of some countries that in the DRC. Why is this so?
Oh, well, the congressman likes pointing the NRM-ness in me. I could answer then from that perspective that it is in the manifesto of NRM that the mandate given in the 5 years is that we want to live to see Pan-Africanism, we want to live to see regional peace, and which we have practically done it. Those Sarah mentioned it in a derogatory sense, but we have contributed to peace. So the interest of a country like Uganda, particularly under NRM, is that we want to see peace there. And that is why we're in the forefront of the Great Lakes. There is a monitoring team that is formed, which is based in Congo. It's brought of many states of the Great Lakes. Uganda's presence in the monitoring team is there. We also know for a fact that in the Uganda's interest, there's ADF in Congo, and we wouldn't like them to come and destabilize here. But also found why it is that we want peace there. We wish them well. And if anything is to be done, it is always done in conjunction with them because we respect their sovereignty. So that is as far as we are concerned. I hope other states in the region would have the same thing, would have the same view. And I would definitely then restrain and would wish to know that we are not interested in a direct material interest there, except if it is a normal trade relationship, which has happened a long time ago since our grandparents, but now with the two sovereignty will trade. So that is the interest there. The interest there is to see that our friends live in peace and to see that whichever point that we may contribute, we are willing to do it. And as I already said, we are in the monitoring team. You have good relationship with Congo. We do everything that we can. And that is only to the extent that we want peace there. And we also want we don't want their lack of peace to be an instability on our side.
Interesting. I think we are getting into the break, and I would want us to possibly, Sarah is talking about the peace, but of course we had a press release from Kigali, of course, trying to hint the fact that I think Uganda is trying to destabilize or it has a hand in what is happening in Congo. But I think much on that we'll have to discuss that from the break when you get back. But also we've been powered by Inspire Coffee, and of course, I don't know, maybe it's one of the reasons why some regions are not so much covered. Two of us have only benefited today. But I think after the break, we'll need to know why.
The politics of exclusion.
We need to know why, but of course, all of us will have to be
resource conflict
covered at this point. So kindly follow this conversation. We are live on our YouTube, on Civic Space TV. Kindly follow, and subscribe to the page. But also our conversation is running live on our chat show, UG hashtag on Twitter, and also Facebook. We are live. Please be part of these conversations. Throw in your comments, and we need to hear from you and what you have to say about the region, and of course the conflict that is around Africa. See you after this break. Welcome back from that short break, and of course we are here at on the Civic Space TV and trying to make an understanding of our regional politics, but also importantly trying to understand also what is happening in Congo, the endless conflicts in Congo. Of course, my panelists are here, and we're trying to see where do we go from here? And just right after the break, Sarah, I think it was your time. We needed to first appreciate Congo, the Congo issue. We finished the whole regional perspective, but also we're trying to narrow down to Congo. There is seemingly, of course, the conflict is not ending, but also there are countries that have interest in the region. Awich says that Uganda's interest, of course, is ensuring that there is peace in the region. Do you agree with that? To ensure that there is peace in Congo, and that is why we are in there.
Of course, he agrees.
Which was referring to their manifesto, and I need to admit really that I've not read it. Because over time, these manifestos have been reduced into just mere propaganda documents, and they are just crafted in good language to do it for voters, and that's where the story ends. They will dust it again, set a manifesto committee when they are preparing for another faggery in elections. But point among the 10 points program, point number 9 of the same NRM in 86 was about the same, making sure the democratic rights of the neighbors, and I can read the actual wording of point number 9. Cooperation with African countries in defending human and democratic rights of our brothers in other parts of Africa.
And we have stuck to it.
The NRM formed its basis as a Pan-Africanist leaning organization. I happen to be Pan-Africanist myself, and I know that theirs is mere propaganda. But I will not go into that. Maybe we'll have a day to debate NRM as a party in power for now going into 4 decades. And I think it would be a very justified conversation to have on the Civic Space TV. Going into the regional and the geopolitical dynamics that have perpetrated the conflict in DRC, to the extent that it is now known either as the endless conflict or the conflict without a name in most of the international writings and reports. DRC conflict always swallows in the neighbors. The African Union has a principle of intervene and don't interfere. And then, because there was a debate of if there is a conflict in your neighboring country, the non-interference principle. But do you then watch on, if you have an influx of refugees, that restrain your resources meant for your citizens, and you can't chase away freeing people for peace? Do you keep quiet if you have bombs flying over borders, because these are porous borders, and hitting your citizens? How do you behave if your neighboring country has lost the nexus for controlling their internal dynamics? It was agreed that it is impossible to just watch under the principles of good neighborness, under the principles of peace and security and regional cooperation, and many other principles. We have mechanisms concerning Uganda and the DRC as the axis of conflict in the Great Lakes region, which did refer to the Great Lakes Conference. When the Great Lakes Conference membership was being constituted, the principle was you're either involved or affected by the DRC conflict. By then, Uganda and Rwanda were deeply involved in the DRC conflict with the Mobutu, removal of Mobutu, then Kabila Senior, then when Kabila Junior came to power, because this conference started when Kabila Senior had been overthrown by the son. And then the background to that included several international efforts, including the Inter-Congolese dialogue, where people sat in detail the first big, I think, round table for the parties involved in the Great Lakes conflict, internal discussion, the inter-Congolese dialogue. There were rebels facilitated by Rwanda, including the Mzee, the Mzee Pan-Africanist who died recently, Professor Wamba Diawamba, including Bizima Karaha, including so many other names, but the two stand out because Bizima Karaha, being Tutsi, was more Rwanda-leaning, and then Wamba Diawamba. Even there are cartoons up today of the likes of General Tafira and others carrying Wamba Diawamba on their backs. And then we had Jean-Pierre Bemba and others whom we later used as a tool in the Central African Republic conflict. So these efforts and interests are deeply entrenched. One is the need for political control and stability after the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, where you had the ex-FAR Interahamwe fleeing into the Eastern DRC and threatening to destabilize Rwanda. So the lack of internal control in DRC creates bases that are weakly governed or non-governed territories with vast forests that become a safe haven for rebel groups. There is no government. Any disagreeing entity in their countries can go and sit in the DRC jungles. By then, people would do, all you needed was to call BBC and declare war. And then, of course, the conflict entrepreneurs that manufacture arms. And this brings in the international actors, the international capitalists, who are the monopoly of arms manufacture. Normally supply guns to rebels on credit, with agreements on what businesses and deals you can do to them once you capture power. So you don't need capital. Set up a rebel group. You need a few networks. So then you had now the neighboring countries, especially Rwanda and Uganda, that had democratic disagreements or contestations, having rebels with bases in the Eastern DRC that had no control. Then what do? You have a stable Uganda or a seemingly stable Uganda, and you have people in the jungles of Chivu and the Eastern DRC areas threatening to destabilize you, and there is no government to cooperate with, to flush them out. As we speak today, we have about 10,000 UN peacekeepers in Eastern DRC. But what peace are they keeping? Well armed, well facilitated, and under the MONUSCO arrangement. Previously, under MONUC, there were even counter-accusations of the UN peacekeeping missions engaged in armed sales. So this conflict swallows in the whole world. It is not just the neighbors. You have the interests, the UN overriding mandate to keep peace world over, and I think chapter 5 of the UN Charter. You have the people interested in their businesses, the arms manufacturers. You have the democratic dividends that create a political risk in a country. And then you have the neighbors who must be involved, or else their countries will be destabilized. And at the center of this, you have minerals, you have wealth that facilitates actually rebels to be based there. As we speak today, this year, World Central Bank released data of gold having surpassed coffee and tourism as the #1 foreign exchange earner. But is this of Uganda? But do we mine this gold here? Where is it coming from? Then, of course.
You know. Stop abusing my bouquet when it's a net contributor to national debt.
And then because it is the political elite involved in smuggling this coffee, the tax on coffee is the tax on gold is so negligible, 0.5. So it is easy to bring in coffee here. We have processing plants, we have less mining as a nation, But we have gold skyrocketing as the biggest foreign exchange earner of Uganda when we don't mine it. And I don't think there is data of how it is imported and the taxes it pays. If it was official trade and the proper taxation, citizens would benefit. So part of it is what makes it easy. And DRC has a fertile ground for people to settle there. You can settle there, you can find the vast mineral resources, find a way of buying them cheaply from the people. Because people pick gold, they don't know where to put it. And you find you are buying gold maybe at $1. So it is easier to sustain a rebel group in the eastern jungles than anywhere else in the world. Among the solutions for this, the inter-Congolese dialogue had an issue of creating a federal state in the DRC to ensure that there is proper management of these provinces, of these areas deeply. Or even dividing DRC into 2 or 3 countries. These were part of the issues on table. But of course, that decision was never taken. But look at the government of Tshisekedi, the current president, Felix, Tshisekedi. How is it pronounced?
Tshisekedi.
You see, everybody has their own pronunciation. But that's the beauty of Africa. He inherited a very weak state with the Ebola outbreak, then COVID, then these militias, and he has not had his proper bearing on the country. So as you talk now, just a few months, I think we are still dealing with ADF attacks in the country. I think now for a month. I think yesterday there was an explosion in Kibuku which killed 2 young children. So you have ADF with bases there. Now they are part of the Islamic State, saying they are Central African Republic, part of the IS. And then really it's a catch-22 problem. But also many countries benefit from that. The beginning of M23, as I conclude, I know that I've taken time. 2012, 2013, when they were flushed out by combined forces of Tanzania and South Africa. And I still remember the Twitter post by Jakaya Kikwete, then the president. He just posted one sentence. There had to be an adult in the room after flushing out M23, then backed by Uganda and Rwanda. And it was agreed that M23 be resettled in Uganda. And their commander then, Sharita Makenga, came and was staying at Silver Springs Hotel for some months. Then later we saw reports that M23 have crossed the borders. They are still headlines, going back to DRC. Yet we have border controls. How did they escape? Some of them were in Western Uganda, in the refugee camp in Rwampara. How did they move? Where did they pass? And they crossed with guns. And who allowed that action to happen? So this is the M23 that has regrouped and is now causing havoc. I know Rwanda has released a statement denying responsibility, but even in 2012 and 2013, it was very difficult for Uganda and Rwanda to acknowledge responsibility. So I don't expect any country to come up. You know, it is only terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS that no matter acknowledge responsibility of such acts. These countries pretending to be democratic cannot. So I don't want to take that statement on face value that they are not involved. Why were they involved in 2012 and 2013? And what has changed? 2 is who is behind the escape in courts of M23 from Uganda, crossing our borders that are properly monitored, properly patrolled, and how can refugees and the rebel that surrendered walk through a camp in their uniform, cross border with their arms and return to a country where it was agreed under the UN auspices that they cannot live there? 3, in the spirited defense that Uganda and Rwanda put across in 2013, it had to take the presentation of satellite videos by UN with evidence of surprise to M23 for these countries to admit and agree to disarm M23? This is the question that we must visit with honesty.
Interesting. Joseph, would you want to make a rejoinder on that? And also interestingly, how possibly Kigali came through and made that press release to distance themselves from the M23, and why is it? And who are these M23? Possibly that possibly the viewers out there would want to know, and why are they so central in this Uganda?
Kigali has done the decent thing to at least officially issue a statement. What has Kampala done? You know, Kampala has not done anything because they're the master of the operation in as far as these issues are concerned in the region. And it's really shame on them. Shame on Kigali and shame on Kampala. You know, Congo is the most, quote, raped country in the world, and particularly focusing on women and children. It's official, UN figures. But number two, also Congo is the country which per capita has got the biggest number of UN wasted resource deployment for ages. And actually, the part of Congo in which Uganda and Rwanda continue to mine is not only the richest, but also amongst the most miserable. The Congo bit that we're talking about is really, as quote again, raped as much as you could say the African continent has been by external forces. And I think as responsible Africans, we should not stand by and watch this continue. Uganda is yet to pay for Mr. Museveni and his team for the invasion and plunder of Congo. Is it 10 billion US dollars? That is my money. I did not ask these guys to go there. These guys went down there. They got away with it because it's just about paying some money, 10 billion US dollars. But that money is not going to come from Museveni's pocket. It's not going to come from Kagame's pocket. It's not coming from the commanders' pockets. If anything, their commanders have got billions worth in skyrocketing equipments and buildings around Kampala and other places bursting as a result of Congo, while ordinary Ugandans are going to commit themselves to pay this. And perhaps in future, these are things that we need to be looking forward, Mr. Awich.
I think Uganda is paying back by constructing.
From where?
Constructing.
Whose money?
roads.
But the point is, whose money? Whose money? Whose money?
That's not part of the paying back. Actually,
not-
at
no,
one
in a
time,
way,
DRC
it's not
wanted
really
to
written, but,
attach our properties abroad, our foreign properties
yeah.
abroad as a country.
It is not directly paying, but it's indirectly show that okay, there is this solidarity and we are brothers.
I know.
Good for you.
I know you're playing the presenter's devil's advocate, but this is an extremely important point because we are talking about regional stability, but we should also talk about the implications of the regional instability on and how it impacts on individual economies. And the economy that really officially, quote, benefits, including construction of roads, to go and mine more gold, is one for which the ordinary citizens is burdened. And, you know, these are by men, mainly men, who have no mandate from us, the citizens, to be able to go there. But I also take you back historically, that ironically, it took leadership of Uganda in the very early part of the 60s to support progressive forces in Congo, Lumumba's forces after the killing of Patrice Lumumba. And that's why UPC is not in particularly good books with some of these imperial forces. And that is the thing that led to the Idi Amin so-called the gold scandal. Because the gold scandal thing was, yes, Amin had been mandated to go down there as a cover, you know, to support the liberation forces down there. But of course, he got an opportunity to begin playing money out of it. Why I'm making this is this. Why I'm making this point is this. In answer to the original question of instability and conflict within our region, what Congo actually needs is the support to democratize, support for institutions to be strengthened as a nation state, support for it to have an element of its own sovereignty in such a manner that this vast resource community, country, should be given the opportunity to enjoy their benefits, to the extent that Uganda's benefit should be as a result of interregional trade directly, rather than by people going to cut timber. And I don't know how much the people that are like Tafiris will know about these things, to go and cut timber and steal for themselves. That's one. Number two, what did Rwanda and Uganda go to do with it? partly because the boys of Anglo-American, they had the opportunity, the rights to go ahead and play like sport boys. You know, if a citizen of Uganda commits a crime in Uganda and crosses over to Kenya, Uganda has got no right, supposedly, to do haute pursuit into Kenya. The legal provision frameworks that my two colleagues do know on how the two countries to engage and how to make sure that this individual who crosses, either they get brought back legally, or perhaps get arrested, detained, and treated under international law. What we are doing to Congo is actually a continuation of the wrapping of the continent, but this time concentrating on the country, which really by and large lies on the biggest amount of resources. A stable and democratic Congo would be one in which the neighboring countries, like Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, all the neighboring countries, Sudan and others, would really by and large benefit. Just imagine the resources that Sarah was talking about, if this country was allowed to grow. Maybe instead of some of our girls wrapping their heads going to do and pretend that they're Muslims in the Middle East to clean, perhaps they would just cross like it happens between Luxembourg, Germany, and others. You basically just cross the border formally. After all, would have now been regional integration, and you just cross to work and come back. And we would all grow together as African nations. And I think, considering that Uganda was the first African country to intervene in the interests of Congolese after Patrice Lumumba, maybe Congolese would look at us as good friends rather than the bad friends today. While I was away, which I worked with a few Congolese friends, and I can tell you that one young Congolese in my team told me quite openly, I think I've said this on air before, quite openly, how much he actually detests us Ugandans, that because we're directly responsible for their miseries and the rape and abuse of their citizens and the looting of their countries, and that we would pay. Now, this young man was not joking, but quite clearly you could actually see the pain in his eye. And the fact that he actually told me the manner in which he did means that we actually need to be very careful. Once in a while we talk about our own national conflicts in where I plead to Mr. Museveni for Jesus to touch him so that we have a national table in which we're able to reconcile and begin to have a conversation as citizens of this country, in a peaceful manner in which there's a possibility for all our children going forward together. I think that should really be able to touch the region so that, as I said, Kagame does not have to cross into Congo because he got the equipment from Uganda, France, and America, but that there are provisions within regional blocks and internationally that if there are people who are thieves who run away from Rwanda to cross into Congo, we use the standards that Sudan would use if a Sudanese stole and did something in Sudan and came into Uganda.
Interesting.
Yes,
go with
I am burning with something. First, I'd like to thank Sarah for the detailed explanation about the forces. But I just want to add something by way of clarification that earlier on, one of the earliest armed movements, which commonly was referred to as Banyamulenge, was a Tutsi ethnicity kind of rebellion. And I like to say that on the other side of the hill, like you have in Uganda in Kisoro, Bafumbira, with Tutsi also, Rwanda Tutsi, the Kale Kayura group. But on the other side of the hill, the Nyamulenge hill, there are also the Tutsi. There's a Tutsi, why they derived their name Banyamulenge, because from the hill that is, but they're also Tutsi. Now this has metamorphosized, and the recent M23 is part of them. Now, part of why, and after the other attack, part of why they were settled in Uganda is that between Uganda, Tanzania, and Congo, Uganda was seen as a neutral country to the conflict. That is why they were hosted here. How else would you explain the hosting of a force which was thrown out from another country? That's why they were here. But now, Sarah brings in an aspect of how did they escape? Was it deliberate? Was it out of their maneuver? I needed, as a party in power, needed to have consulted and checked. But we should also remember that in 1990, a group of big Rwandese left here. I was sharing a bed with some of them. Kanyonyi, who ended up a bodyguard to Kagame.
Wasn't there
Personally,
consent
we
on that?
really
That's an
didn't know.
escape.
Personally, at my level, I didn't know. But it was like an escape. So, if M23 was settled here, because Tanzanian brigade went there.
And that is the commitment at UN
Yes.
level.
Tanzanian brigade was there. So Tanzania was part of the conflict. Rwanda was clearly part of the conflict. Congo was also part of the conflict. So Uganda was part of the neutral person. That is why the M23. Now, it's debatable now. How did they go? Is it a weakness of our system, which was a host country? Was it deliberate? That one we can pursue it
They
later.
were captured
So-
by media walking in.
So that
Line
one
is crossing.
need to be checked. But the other thing is that much as in international law you could have a right of hot pursuit, Uganda has not yet taken that right. Even in South Sudan, where we had a big army fighting, Lord's Resistance Army, it was a bilateral arrangement. Even in Central Africa, where we had the troops, it was a bilateral arrangement. And even in Congo, as we can do, say, tomorrow, it will be a bilateral arrangement. So we have not exercised our right of hot pursuit, which is acceptable in international law. So I needed to explain that as well, that being there now or in future, anytime that we would, it will be for by bilateral relations. So the dynamics in the current conflict, from Sarah's perspective on how they left, when it was decided and agreed we are neutral, so host them, can maybe by implication would implicate Uganda. But clearly, after the war, they never came back. Because if they were sent, this recent attack, that is Sunday, ending Sunday, they didn't come back to Uganda. The world knows
This
where they
attack,
went. Yes, this recent one.
they haven't come back. They've just stopped fighting.
No, they went to some other places. Or if they stopped, but they have not come. Because the idea is if they were sent by the authorities in Uganda, then they would have come back, but they have not. If they came, then everybody would want to.
Do they have to come back to show that, okay, they were sent by Uganda? Do they?
Yes, they can.
Yes.
Oh, if you are sent by me and you went there and found it hot and you ran to Sarah, so what? You say, okay, you sent me, but I've run to Sarah. Does it make any logical sense? That you have sent me, I found it hot, however, I've now run to Sarah. It doesn't make sense. No, you definitely will have to run to whoever sent you.
It could be a new assignment that they have to stay there.
No, that is if you stay there.
So
but I'm saying if you
when they came in 2013, were they running to whoever sent them?
2013 when?
After 23.
When the Tanzanians disorganized them or after the agreement?
They were hammered.
No, after the agreement. I've repeatedly said here that the parties to the conflict were identified. And therefore, Uganda was seen as a non-party to the conflict. That is why they are considered like a third state, a third country where these people could be hosted. You couldn't send them to
the nearest most acceptable does not necessarily mean to be the
You
neutral.
couldn't send them to Tanzania. Tanzania would have taken them as war prisoners because Tanzanian brigade is the one which flushed them out. You couldn't send them to Rwanda. Congo would say, you see, now you have sent them back to their supporters. You want to organize them to come back. So logically, the only person you could settle with was a neutral party, which happened to be Uganda.
Now, then after temporary rehabilitation, Uganda said, since we are done with our task, you can go back and continue.
That's why I'm saying it needs to be examined, therefore, whether their going was an escape or, for example,
what do you think,
party,
considering the circumstances, and you're a soldier?
What I know is that
really?
the possibility is, if any third country wanted these people to be involved, they could still manipulate and mobilize them here without our knowledge, and they would go.
That's one option.
They would go.
But in this case, they went.
With our security network that includes VSOs, sub-county.
No, it happens. I mean, but this guy who burnt people in
Can I give you some information?
Kanungu wasn't it to wear securities? Yes.
Can I give you some information? Before M23, there was another rebel group led by Laurent Nkunda in DRC. Same Tutsi dominated. that one was singularly backed by Rwanda. After the intervention of a UN committee led by the late President Mukapa and President Obasanjo as special envoys for the Great Lakes region, Rwanda said, okay, let's withdraw our person. And Laurent Nkunda was taken back home. So the issue that people are relocated to the neutral countries happens only for dissidents, people seeking refugees, but that's just an example, immediate example. So after Laurent Nkunda and his group, then there was a reemergence of M23. So it changed face, changed a bit of leadership, same agenda.
So, Sarah, how do you explain the choice of M23 being brought to Uganda?
Which I have.
Was it
I
brought
have
by
access,
Uganda?
and it's on the internet. If you go and Google the UN experts report on DRC concerning M23, that report has satellite pictures. It's a report on the internet that implicated Uganda and Rwanda.
Does that answer why they
No,
chose to bring them
I'm
here?
coming. So the issue of Uganda involvement, I'm not a security expert, but I am an interest in governance and stability in Africa, and I read some of these reports. So I read that report. It had even satellite videos of the involvement of the two countries. You can go to the UN website, this information is available. Whether it can be contested or not, it is not my duty now. I am debating information by the most biggest global agency that we are all members of the UN. On the choice of Uganda then, they were asked to choose which country could be trusted for them to disarm. And you chose Uganda, and Uganda accepted. As to whether it was seen as neutral, I will reserve my comment.
Interesting. As we're getting into the closure, I possibly would want to first ask here. First of all, Uganda is about the sixth globally in the ranking for hosting refugees, but also I think the second in Africa. I would want to understand: is this sustainable? Having refugees in Uganda, do we have these resources? Is it a sustainable venture, if we have to say? I wish I would want to ask, but also as we also concluding, I would want to ask whether on the way forward of having a lasting peace in the greater East African region, but also the Horn of Africa. So if you could merge those two, as we turn into a conclusion.
I think I trust my summary capability. I'll try to summarize. One, on the issue of refugees. You know, refugee seeking is a right, and you can't, the international law doesn't allow you for even refoulement. That's what is called refoulement. For you to throw back the person, even when it is a wanted person there. So refoulement is prohibited under international law, and whoever seeks refuge should be entertained. Now, about sustainability, I know countries like America say it drains their resources. For simple thing, like America can even argue that if you bring these people, our sewage system, like this city is designed to take this number of sewage. You bring more people, it will break our sewage. As simple. That's why Americans get even people from Afghanistan and pays money to say keep them in another country, so that, because even if they came to their country, they would sustain them anyway. So rather than come to New York and harden on the strength of their sewage and break it, give them that money to stay in another country. So sustainability here for us, we still have enough food. But even if we didn't, the international community brings the food. So I don't think we have reached a point where we can start rejecting refugees like the Americans do and pay it to let them stay outside. So it is not yet a big threat. We can sustain them. We have the resources, and the world will bring. About security in the Horn, it's back to, maybe this is Sarah's best area, leadership, as he wants to say it. But it's a big thing, because if now a country like Ethiopia disintegrates, and I said it the other day here when we were discussing independence, that we can cry, we can say everything wrong. But I said Uganda with 65 indigenous communities as listed in the constitution, still we are a country. And I warn that Ethiopia is about to break. And people are saying you're comparing among the weakest. I said, but sustainability as Uganda 60 years after as a country, 59 years as a country is good enough. I want here that Ethiopia is about to, now you have 6 fighting forces. Whoever will reach the Addis, we don't know whether it will not reach on behalf of itself. How will it coordinate with the other forces? And the country will break. So we pray for them and we call on the leaders. We are going to have IGAD soon in Munyonya. I hope it will yield fruits. The East African region, Congo, we have to keep looking with Congo with keen eye, and we pray that our leaders take keen steps and honest views, because I see dishonesty. Some people talk from, is it called with a twisted tongue? You talk here, but the mutima is something else. So unless we really talk keenly with something that about Congo, we are still in for a bad thing. So that's my view about refugee status, the sustainability, the East African, especially Congo, and the Horn of Africa.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nduga. Thank you. Sarah?
Well, the 10 most refugee hosting countries in the world include Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, Liberia, Malta, Sudan, Sweden, South Sudan, and Uganda, coming in at number 6 with 3.7% of the global refugees. We are a hospitable country, a hospitable people with a good climate. And if it wasn't for the disruption and selfishness of leaders, we would be a developed country. Unfortunately, we have our own internal democratic challenges that are now glaring. It is the principle of Ubuntu to give refuge to somebody who needs it. Ugandans have been refugees. We have brain drain that we have now romanticized into diaspora, with even taxation, remittances clarified, and others. Yet these resources would be much needed to develop their countries first if we had a conducive environment. We have a good refugee policy, ranked among the best globally, and we are welcoming. We don't yet have a crisis of hosting refugees. My only reservation is using refugee hosting for propaganda purposes. We saw it during the debate on removal of age limit as governance actors, with most of the world that were convinced and saying, but you see, Uganda is hosting our refugees, President Museveni is welcoming our refugees, and we challenged some of these actors and told them that there's a difference between Uganda and Museveni. When you have a good refugee law, it is a law for Uganda, even when Museveni is no longer leader. These are principles that should remain. The good principles should remain, the bad principles should be reformed. So they shouldn't be targeted to an individual. So my only reservation is that the propaganda value around refugee hosting. Stability in the Great Lakes region, Horn of Africa, and the general African continent. At the height of economic recession in the US, President Bill Clinton made the famous statement of, it's the economics is stupid. Really, our confusion as an African people is a leadership question. We can try to find other reasons around it. We have failed the people in several ways, on several accounts, and the leadership should be ashamed of themselves. When it comes to DRC specifically, many of the leaders look at confusion in DRC like dogs looking at the death of a cow because of the benefits. Because if a cow dies in a household, the dogs feast. I think it's the most time they eat the most meat. So when there is confusion in DRC, many people are looking at plundering DRC as compared to helping the people of DRC out of the crisis. And it's a big shame that the DRC as a people have failed to get strong leadership to protect its people and have left them in the hands of the vultures that are looking at benefiting from a conflict. I hope sometime we can get around these issues.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for those kind remarks. And Joseph?
Yeah, I think I'll just conclude with a bit of a disclaimer on Sarah's observation about the Congolese people. The Congolese people are actually helpless.
I said Congolese leaders.
Congolese leaders, okay.
Not to the people.
The failed, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So if it's Congolese leaders, that's absolutely true, because many of them have actually conspired with some of the regional players to actually plunder Congo and to incapacitate it just as much as the other leaders in the region and across the continent have conspired what Obere called quislings to create the mess in which we are as a continent. But back to the earlier question about the question of refugees in Uganda as a matter of principle. Indeed, I concur with Awich that the principle of refoulement was first introduced by UPC that built the foundation for refugee policies in Uganda. I say so very emphatically and repeatedly that we reminded the British, ironically at the time, who were the early signatories to the 1951 Geneva Convention about the basic rights of refugees, where we demanded, UPC demanded that Rwandese then facing genocide in 1959, 60-61, must be allowed to stay in Uganda. And that was contrary to what the British were trying to do. So that's, again, for the record. And I know people really find it very classy sometimes not to clap for UPC when we score something, particularly historically, in context today and going forward. So really, by and large, I think I agree with my colleagues that the question of refugees in Uganda is not really a matter of conversation. Sometimes it irritates me when Museveni and his people play it as if Museveni created and founded this these policies, programs, and including the goodness of Uganda. No, Museveni is a beneficiary of the goodness of Ugandans, and Kagame would actually be a testament of that principle of refoulement in Uganda. And it would be a shame upon them if they want to think that contemporary refugees should not have a right here in Uganda or indeed anywhere else within the continent. Going forward, I think this country, thankfully, will continue to enjoy, this country will continue to ensure that refugees who turn up here enjoy the very basic rights and freedoms as enshrined by international law. I don't think that's the issue. The issue is beyond being played up by propaganda, as Sarah says, is corruption, where it has been reported that people in government and people in the Prime Minister's office use refugees as a source for change in their pockets, which is really shameful, or shame that you would use the livelihood of people to basis as a source for income. Really, as a former refugee and as a refugee scholar, one of the reasons actually why I went specifically to study forced migration was one, to make sure that I understood very clearly how a regime like Museveni's would come to power and create a situation in which citizens of this country would not only leave or be forced to leave, or perhaps create it and do what Museveni did in the early 90s in London. And I was in that hall where he was actually enjoying, claiming that, so long as they pay us taxes, we get money in terms of early part of remittances, it's okay for them to be outside. I think it's rather unfortunate that any leader would enjoy the fact that their citizens are outside their countries against their will, so long as for them they're getting the change as a result. So that should really not only be a matter for Ugandans, but really a matter for Africans, that the best of our brains sometimes find themselves outside. The best of our resources sometimes find themselves outside. Indeed, my Congolese friends, and I think even as I talk, I know Congolese friends who are doing rather well contributing to other nations outside the continent when they can hardly be able to build a sense of stability in their country. I think it is possible that this country will continue with this goodness. What I reject, though, is a situation in which refugees come into Uganda, enjoy our goodwill, and they abuse the very basic rights and privileges granted by citizens of Uganda, and in many cases, as has been the case, pick up arms to cause death to citizens of this country. That is something that I will say today, I'll say it again, I think that's something that Ugandans will reject, and I don't know any other country in the world where somebody who gets refuge in another country kills the citizens of that country, and citizens of that country help them to club. That has happened in this country. I think should stop. But side by side with that, I think I hope as we seek stability in East Africa, let's seek stability in the continent. And like we said at the beginning of the conversation, try and look at the root causes of conflicts in the region and in the continent to create a situation in which we're able to translate our largely raw natural resources into high quality, value added stuff so that our grandchildren can enjoy the wealth of this continent. Because when you look around China, you wonder what really they have except the peoples. And it's a shame that they now come and we have to begin to pay them in order to just access Entebbe Airport.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for that closure. And of course, thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you very much, Awich Pollar, for always sparing time and, of course, honoring our invitations to be part of the conversations that try to help shape the discourse in the country. Of course, also try to inform our people out there that follow the conversations on the
Sure,
Civic Space
we have
TV.
to come here.
Yes.
This discussion is not useless. And our coming is not because we have other things. You can even see we are trying to say, please hold on. We have many things, but this is as important.
Thank you.
And for Gringoris to be on the hot seat.
Yes, well, and he has a way of cooling it down. Thank you also to our viewers out there who are constantly part of this conversation on our socials, on of course, on the official page, Civic Space TV on YouTube. Thank you very much for following the conversation. And of course, let's have these conversations going throughout the week on the Chat Show UG hashtag on Twitter. Please be part of the conversations. And of course, Inspire Coffee has given us the day, and we meet next time. My name has been Masesa Demiano, your show host. Thank you.